5 Radio. It's time for our weekly segment with Grayson Grundhoefer of SicEm365.com. Brought to you by Pioneer Steel and Pipe, where customer service is their main focus, and best in metal, steel, and pipe for large or small projects, with 2 locations in Waco and Bryan. Family owned and operated since 1943.
365 Sports on the road on this Friday, week 3 of the Texas high school football season. We have a game tonight, 6:30 pregame Midway in Vandegrift. But we also have a huge weekend in college football. Grayson Grundhoefer, SicEm365.com on Fridays, joins us, recruiting analyst, football analyst. And Grayson, the news of Nakua and Romney not playing according to Pete Thamel. Your thoughts about, obviously, how that affects Brigham Young's offense and what Baylor...
Yeah, I mean, guys, this is a massive loss for BYU. And I think, it's kind of evident in the betting circles. I think that's kind of one of the easiest places to start because BYU is getting close to being a 4-point favorite in this game. I think it got as high as 3.5. And then when the news dropped, it shrunk to 2.5 now. And I think it's going to continue to shrink. I think by game time, this is probably going to be an even bet. And I think that's smart. If you look at kind of what BYU has done and kind of where they've thrived, even in last year's matchup, they didn't have any success running the football against the Bears, but where they did have success with spreading the ball out, taking shots downfield, and winning one-on-one matchups against the Baylor cornerbacks and safeties. And without those 2 guys, it's massive. Like, I don't even know if I can, really explain how massive it is in just words, but just being the fact that, like, BYU's biggest advantage was the fact that they could spread Baylor vertically and take shots downfield and hope that the immaturity of the Baylor secondary with a lot of young guys and a lot of new guys would flash a little bit. Now it's going to be more like BYU's going to try to probably slow the tempo down, run the football, and just hope that their defense can get enough stops to keep Baylor within striking distance. But I think after this news, I think it's become pretty evident that Baylor should be the favorite in this game heading into Pro Bowl on Saturday night.
Grayson, one of the other swings in this game from this year to last year for BYU would have to be them closing the gap on the physicality. And most of those guys are back, plus you've added some people like Jackson Player. Do you think that BYU has closed that gap at all?
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the better questions because I think going into the weekend, you looked at last year's game and Baylor ran for over 300 yards in last year's game. And really the final score was 38-24, but it really felt like a 38-17 game because BYU scored with, I believe it was 1:50 left on the clock in that game. And so really Baylor dominated that game. So now coming into this game, I think the bigger thing is Baylor's going on the road. And BYU, I think, is going to be a little bit healthier than they were a year ago. Now, when Baylor played them a year ago, Baylor wasn't fully healthy either, as Terrell Bernard was still working his way back. Gabe Hall wasn't what Gabe Hall is now. And, of course, the addition of Jackson Player. So I still think Baylor has an edge there. I still think that the Bears are going to pretty much dominate up front. I'm not going to say that it's going to be, to the point where BYU can't run an offense because in last year's game, Baylor dominated on the defensive line. They had 5 sacks. They slowed down the run game, and still Jaron Hall was very, very effective. So I still think BYU can be effective, but if you just go off last year's game, they were effective because they took deep shots, and now they're missing 2 wide receivers who were very, very good for them last year. So while I think BYU is a great team, I don't know that they can afford to lose their 2 best receivers going into a week where they're playing a legit top 10 team like Baylor.
Grayson, Albany was what it was. I mean, let's face it. I mean, you could have rolled the Kyron Drones out there for the full game and they probably win comfortably, or name any other position you want to, really. I mean, that was what it was supposed to be. But what, if anything, did you learn about Baylor that you were curious about going in, knowing that the competition wasn't so that, you get a good idea exactly of kind of where everybody is?
Yeah, so I think it was pretty clear that once again, Baylor is going to be a run-heavy football team. And I think we got to see the depth at the running back position, which was definitely great to see. With Squirrel not fully back to 100%, or at least not at a point where Baylor was giving him a full workload against Albany. You got to see Richard Reese and Quaylen Jones, 2 guys who had great fall camps, and you got to see kind of the culmination of fall camp against Albany, which was great to see. But going off of that run game, you saw these running backs have success, but you also saw Baylor take a lot more shots downfield. And I think that's going to be consistent with this team. You're going to see Blake Shapen take more risk downfield. Now, that may lead to turnovers, but at the end of the day, it's going to lead to more touchdowns. And last year, even Gary Bohannon had issues with turnovers. And while I think Shapen will have his fair share of turnovers, I think Shapen has a chance to get to that 30 touchdown mark throwing the football, which Gary wasn't even close to a year ago. So I think what I really learned was, this offense is really coming together to Jeff Grimes' vision, to where you're going to run the football really aggressively. You're going to be physical, but you're also going to take shots downfield and really try to exploit mismatches in the secondary. And so I saw that from Baylor in their first game. I think the other things were just the defense. The defensive line is great. We still need to see more out of the secondary. They got beat a couple times against Albany, so I'm very curious how they adjust and kind of, look towards these next few games and how they're going to kind of game plan around some of these younger guys. But I think overall there's a lot of talent there. And so I'm still confident they're going to have success. But I do think that's an area that Baylor will probably get attacked more so than not through the passing game, because I think their defensive line is just that good.
You can always lose a game early, and especially if it's a quality opponent on the road or even at home, neutral, whatever. Is this a game that doesn't mean they're going to win 9 or 10 or 11 games, but is this a game if they don't win because of other road games where they're going to be, that it all of a sudden, this may not just be a repeat of what they were able to get to last year or close to that?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really insightful question. And the reason why I say that is because going into this game, I really felt like Baylor was going to win, but I also sat here and said, if they lost this game, it really wouldn't doom their season. Like, they're going to be fine going on and playing in the Big 12 and playing some teams they're familiar to. And, losing a game early in the season to BYU is not that big of a deal, because I think BYU is a legit top 25 team. But with BYU having their 2 wide receivers out, I do think this becomes more of a must-win. And the reason why I say that is because while Jaron Hall is great, Jaron Hall is a great quarterback for BYU. He's going to have an awesome year. I think you take away his 2 top weapons, and that's the area where Baylor's weakest in their secondary. So you take away the 2 guys that I think could pose the biggest problem for the Baylor defense. I think this turns into a must-win game. This is not a game that Baylor should go lose. This is not a game that Baylor should really feel too threatened outside of the road environment. And I think this is a game they need to win, and especially for their psyche. And the reason why I say it is because Dave Aranda, as great of a coach as Dave Aranda is, we all know he's a great coach, but he's talked about their road problems. And they're 3-7 since Dave Aranda took over as the head coach. And I know the COVID year, I know there were extenuating circumstances, but they did lose some games they should have won, like West Virginia in 2020 and Texas Tech in 2020 and TCU last year. Those are games they should have won, and they need to get better at winning on the road. And this is a matchup in particular that really favors them now with these 2 guys being out. So, yeah, I do think this becomes more of a must-win, because it's more of a statement and more of a moment to really show kind of what this program is all about and how they're not going to go on the road and take an opponent for granted. They're going to go and take a win, and Baylor really needs to do that this week in my eyes.
Grayson Grundhoefer, SicEm365 Radio and 365 Sports. Who's better, the Baylor offensive line or defensive line?
Yeah, I think that, when you see the PFF rankings, you see that the offensive line, defensive line are both inside. I know it's the top 10. I think both might be inside the top 5 from last year. So I know a lot of people are really excited about both sides. But for me, this really isn't a difficult question at all. It's the defensive line. And it's because they are 8 deep there, and they have a bunch of guys who I think could be pros in the future. When you look at Apu and Gabe Hall and TJ Franklin and Jackson Flair, you're looking at guys that can be legit NFL players. And you look on the offensive line, I think they fit the scheme great, and I think they're really, really good. And when they get Khalil Keith back, it becomes more of a contest, I think. But at current state, I really think the defensive line is one of the best in the country. And the fact that they can roll out, 3 defensive linemen and feel great, or sometimes even roll out 2 defensive linemen with 2 jacks, 2 outside linebackers on the field. That's a real luxury because of how good they are in the middle. And so I just think this defense line is going to prove some things tomorrow night. And I think that might be the biggest reason why Baylor will win that game in Provo tomorrow.
Grayson, it's been a little while since we kind of reset the table as far as football recruiting goes. We typically do that on the Bearcast, but just for everybody at home who doesn't follow it religiously, kind of just where is the recruiting calendar right now? Baylor, obviously, with a nearly full class at this point. Where do we kind of sit with all that?
Yeah, so 25 commits now. Their most recent was Caden Jenkins, the defensive back out of Louisville. So 25 commits. I think they'll probably add – I would think they're going to get to 27. So I still would think they're going to add 2 more. It's kind of going to be best player available. I think if you look at the guys they've recruited, wide receiver, maybe defensive line, or 2 positions that you look at and go, okay, I could see them adding a player to either of those positions, really. And so kind of the calendar-wise, how that's going to play out is there was a dead period at the start of fall camp at the beginning of August, and it ended at the very end of August. So September 1st was when that dead period ended. That allowed the coaching staff to basically have free reign to contact the 2023 and 2024 classes. And so now it's really just about filling in those last couple spots. I think you're going to see a huge visit date probably on the Oklahoma State game on October 1st. I think there's going to be a lot of recruits there, probably a lot of commits as well. And you'll see them probably add some 2023 guys to come on that visit. You'll see a lot of 2024 prospects as well. And I think that's kind of a date to really target. And that's just kind of the reality of it, because they didn't have, big time non-conference matchups at home like they had with BYU last year. So I think that first conference home game against Oklahoma State is going to be a very important one as Baylor tries to fill out 2023. And then, of course, they're always mindful of the next class. And so 2024 is going to be very, very important as the season progresses and you start to see more visitors, especially once conference play arrives.
And finally, speaking of 2024, football, just kind of wait and see right now, as you just point out, in the process. But basketball, big 2024 commit today with Robert Wright III. Your thoughts on that pickup for Scott Drew and company, who have been on fire last 2, 3, 4 cycles now at this point?
Yeah, this is big time. So he becomes the second commit in the 2024 class, joining Jason Asamoah for the 2024 class. And honestly, I was kind of surprised by this, as far as not necessarily that Baylor landed a really good point guard or a guy who I think is going to be a very nice fit for them, but more so that they weren't even more selective, because I could have seen them being extremely patient and just kind of waiting things out and waiting until they kind of got the look of every single point guard that they really were eyeing. And instead, they went ahead and took the commitment from Robert Wright. And I think that signifies how much they really like Robert and how much he's a great fit for this Baylor program in general. Currently, he's the number 48 player in the country, according to On3, number 39, according to ESPN, and number 25, according to Rival. So I think he's going to be a guy that definitely moves up in the rankings as time progresses. He had really good offers. Maryland, Louisville, Kansas State, Gonzaga, Penn State, Miami. So Baylor's going out, winning battles with guys who aren't in the state of Texas. They're going to Philadelphia. They're winning a battle there with Robert Wright. And I think that signifies just the national brand that Baylor has become, to the point where, when they offer guys are going to really look hard at it and be like, hey, you know what? Maybe I should commit right now so that I secure my spot in that class, because I want to go win a Big 12 championship. I want to have a chance to win a national championship. And there aren't that many programs that have that in their back pocket. But I think Scott Drew and Baylor definitely do now. And I think that's why they were able to secure this commitment from Robert Wright as early as they were able to.
Grayson Grundhoefer, thank you. A football analyst, recruiting analyst, also on the Robert Wright III commitment. He called